So today we're going to talk about I don't even know. We're going to figure it out as we go. Welcome to the HolmFront. Okay, here we are. Um, this was. I'm really curious as to how this is going to turn out altogether, but this should be fun. So here we are. Hello, everyone. I'm
Yeah.
Tyler. This is not going to be on a Thursday, so I can't say welcome to the weekend this time. It is a Tuesday. I'll be releasing this on, and this is going to be a much shorter segment, so I'm going to try and keep it to the point as much as I can with this
We'll see.
movie. But yeah, seriously. Uh, obviously.
You should probably address the. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, my co-host is with me as always, Mitch, my overly autistic friend. The oaf. I still haven't got my shirt made, but I fully intend on doing that. By the way,
Yeah, where's my oaf shirt?
do you want one too? I'll get you one too. So here we are. This is the first virtual call we've done, so obviously I don't have him physically sitting next to me this time, and it's probably not as perfect as I'd like it to be, but it'll improve with time as the other episodes have. So
Yeah, it's good to just be versatile as things change in life and move around and such. So, yeah.
the first time for everything, and I'm also in the middle of a move, which is why my surroundings are not the same. I don't have my nice wrinkled curtain behind me, so you get my old room at my parents' house for this time.
Yeah.
So, what are we talking about today, Mitch? What's the topic?
So, over the weekend, you said, let's go see a movie. And then you gave me the choice between Joker 2, which is the only way I prefer to say that movie because I don't speak French.
I don't
So
think
Joker
anyone knows how to
2,
properly say that one. Everyone's like
I don't
follow
think anyone does it.
a do wow,
Yeah,
which I arguably
whatever.
this is the only movie with the worst title. But go ahead.
Yeah, so there is that, or or we could see Megalopolis and
Megalopolis.
Megalopolis. So I picked Megalopolis because it's Francis Ford Coppola, and even though the reviews are bad, it's like, hey, I mean, maybe it's like cool artistry, right? He's like a master at his craft. You got The Godfather, you got Apocalypse Now, even some of his other works I'm familiar with, like The Conversation I've seen, that's really good too. And this one, this one was not. This was not good at all.
So like Godfather is regarded as one of the greatest films ever made. And
Yes.
then you have the sequels, which I have not seen 2 and 3. I know, surprising. But I do know enough about Coppola and American Zoetrope that obviously I'm interested. And I know he's been
Yeah.
out of movie making for a long time. So when I heard about this movie, I was like, oh well, obviously I'm going to see that. It's got Adam Driver. It's a Coppola film.
Right.
Sounds like a perfect mix, right? So so you have a method. Do you want me to do mine first, or do you want to start?
So yes, I have a method. So I think it's important to set the stage first, though. We go to the theater, we sit down in chairs, movie begins. 2.5 hours later, movie ends. We leave theater completely just mind altered. And then it was like, woof, what a movie to talk about. And then what happened was is I went home and I figured out a way to talk about it. And what I did was is I sat down and I said to myself, okay, he's got a lot in this movie, clearly. So I'm just going to write down every single theme that he put in the movie, or that could potentially be a theme that someone could use to interpret the film. And, usually when you do that, there's like, especially with a big complicated movie like this, you're going to have multiple themes that add up to a greater whole, or like, okay, this one fits into this other larger narrative or this other interpretation, right? The thing is there's more than usual. In fact, there's enough that I would say it's probably best if I just kind of read through the list of themes, and you can make comments or whatever, but I'm not gonna explain myself. I'm just gonna put the theme out there that it could potentially exist.
We're just gonna count them all. We're just gonna be like this. There's 1 through 500.
Yeah, pretty much. Because okay, and I think it's worth noting that I did leave out certain things, like for example, walking happens in this movie. Characters will walk from like one place to another, but that's kind of it's too conventional. So I figured that's not really an interpretation. That's just something that happens in most movies. So stuff like that I took out. But other things where it felt like an intentional choice, where it felt like, oh, you had to put a lot of extra work just to make sure this little brief snippet of a thing happens. So even though it's very brief, the fact that it happened at all is very peculiar. And
Okay.
so I just put that down as potentially something that someone could take and thread through. And I will say the first 10 or 12 or so, I think are more predominant up top. And then after that, I'm a little less certain about how important they are for his vision, but I put them in there anyways in just kind of a mishmash order.
Okay.
Um, yeah. So are you ready for this?
No, go ahead.
Perfect. That's what I want to hear. Okay. All right. So the first theme in
This is
Megalopolis
alcohol. I
is
don't think I can handle this. I'm ready.
good. Sorry to be resuscitating the memories of this film. Okay, so the first theme is Rome. Then the next theme is greed. Then the next theme is the future of America. Then we have Marcus Aurelius. Then we have fables and storytelling,
Okay.
Shakespeare, utopia versus dystopia, artists, architecture, time control and the supernatural, classism, inspiration and muses, golden wealth, roaring 20s, Sputnik, grief, newfound love. You hanging in there?
Keep going.
Betrayal, revenge, 1950s futurism, the advent of the radio, media personalities,
Where are you going with this?
lesbians. I'm just pointing out stuff in the movie.
It's just
Espionage masquerading as research, historical footage of Hitler, the institution of marriage, classical Hollywood visual effects, assassination of a public figure, interacting with the mood using old school filmmaking, satire, but not for the purposes of humor, Nazis, Greek mythology archetypes, a cheesy 90s rock band commercial, and finally,
it did
potentially
happen.
more than one corrupt politician. These things, all of the things I just said, are in this movie.
Which, at a glance, were I to hear about that before I had seen the movie, one would wonder how one would mix all these elements. Um, and before and after seeing the movie, one would conclude you cannot. So- okay, so I will
It's
say,
like he's stuff. Yeah, go ahead.
well, one of the comments I made afterwards was this was very reminiscent of some of the ways that I see your writing not
Yeah.
in the positive ways though, because you tend to be very trollish, and you tend to
Yeah.
play on a lot of themes in order to make a point. He made this movie in those ways without the point. And so the comment that I made to you at the end was like, it was as if it was because you make a lot of your material based on dreams, and this was very dreamlike,
Yeah.
very very. I don't even know how to describe it, but it was as if you had taken a lot of drugs, and then wrote a movie based on the dream you had on those drugs. That's what that felt like to
Yes.
me.
And which is such an apt description because it has all the weirdness and the kind of drive that these things do add up to some larger message, but that larger message is totally imperceptible in this movie. It was
Imperceptible. That's
it
a
was
good word.
rough.
Yeah, imperceptible.
Yeah.
Great word for this
Yeah,
movie.
cuz and like the core I think problem why it's imperceptible is that it just totally fails to create an emotional connection with the audience from from the very beginning. You don't know like what any person's emotional arc is or what they want, what their motivation is. All that stuff is just a total mystery from the moment it begins to the moment it ends.
Mhm.
So you really just there's scenes where characters are like, "Oh, I hate this person," but you never know why, and so it's just becomes yeah, it was rough. It was rough. And I think critics and audiences are totally in accord. If anything, they're being a little bit generous, which it's terrible to say because, you know, there's, I think, aspects of the film that are cool. Like, there's some cool visual effects going on. I do like the old school filmmaking moments that he does,
Yeah,
but like, they just don't make any sense. And I don't know why he's doing them and they don't contribute to anything, seemingly.
nothing. That's the problem. So, okay. Is that your method? You were just giving me the amalgamation of things that he put into this movie,
Yeah,
or
I
do you
was
have
just
okay,
boom.
just
Right, because it's so hard to like I mean, how would you else would you describe this movie? I was talking to some friends and they were like, "Well, what's the movie about?" And I was like like it's and then one of them was like, "I saw the trailer and it's about a guy who's making it a utopia, right?" And I was like,
maybe,
mm.
maybe. I think so. Somewhere in there. Okay, so I struggled. I was like, I spent days just trying to figure out how on earth I was going to talk about this thing because I wanted to do a home front reviews section. This is like the first video, and of all the movies I could have chosen to review, this is the least straightforward. I couldn't pick anything out of it. I was like, how do I figure out what to talk about here? I have no idea. I still have no idea. I'm still struggling with just like what am I going to talk about? So what I wanted to do, what I settled on, I suppose, was okay. I will talk about the things that stood out to me as good, as interesting. There was two things
Okay.
that stood out
Okay.
as any kind of coherent at all. The one was the conversation between I forget the guy's name, but the essentially the stepfather or not so the
Adam Driver and
father-in-law.
the yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, the
yeah. So
father-in-law
he
guy.
plays Gideon in like Mandalorian, and then he plays in Breaking Bad. He's very much the same character in every movie he plays in. I just can't remember
Yeah.
his name, but he has a
For reference,
conversation.
actually, I thought the actors were fine. That
Yeah,
wasn't an issue for me.
on a technical visual
But
level,
yeah,
it's stunning. Like there's a lot of visual feasting you could do in this film. Um,
yeah,
and then the actors are all good with what they have. I mean, they're doing the best they can with what they've got, which is not much at all. Um, so there's a conversation that they have between utopia and dystopia, and where the line is between the two, because Adam Driver's dream is to create a utopia, and then this
yeah,
father-in-law's counterpoint is at what point does the utopia become a dystopia? The conversation they have is interesting. I was like, okay, and you could follow it, which I didn't think that that would be the requirement for a movie, whether it's good or not. But the scene, just the fact that I could follow it was like, this is a good scene, just because everything else
yeah,
you can't. The other
yeah,
scene, which is what played into the themes that I think he was going for, was a scene where Aubrey Plaza's character like starts messing. She starts manipulating, um,
yeah.
putting
So
someone in power in
it
order to
takes a little
manipulate.
context.
Right.
because she marries this old billionaire, John Voight's character, but then you find out later it's just to betray him later for his money. I think it's for his money, but she's
Well,
betraying
also
him.
also to manipulate Adam Driver's character by messing with the banks. You don't know why.
Yes.
You just know that that's what he's doing. Uh,
Yeah.
so he visually represented that pretty interestingly, and it was the only scene where I was like,
Yeah.
"This feels very Greco-Roman in like a mythos type of
Yeah.
storytelling way." And I was like, "Okay, it
Hmm.
seems like this is what he's going for. I like it."
Yeah.
So the
Well,
visual
and
plus the
actually,
storytelling they meshed in that scene, just in a bubble. Outside of it, I don't know what she was trying to accomplish or how it helped the movie at all. I just know that that scene was good. That's about it. That's all I got.
well, that scene I want to hang on to for a minute because I really like that scene too, and
Mhm.
I think it was finally where not a lot of the themes, but that scene probably had the most themes working in unison as I've
Agree.
identified because I have 33 on this list here, so it's a lot. And I don't. This one has a good like half dozen or maybe even a dozen. But basically, one thing he does is it's this conversation. So basically, she tricks Shia LaBeouf's character to go and offer this like contract, basically for John Voight's character to sign, and
Right.
he does it in a bathhouse, which is like very Greco-Roman, as you say. So you have the Roman theme there, but also like the background is really black, like you really can't see the environment very well, and so it felt like a play, like a Shakespeare play
The
moment
whole
where it's
thing,
like
the whole
we
movie did feel
you're
like a
just
play in a lot of ways. The way he does a lot of those
yeah.
things.
But that setting in particular felt like a stage
Sure.
play, looking like wow, like because in other places I'm like, well, you'd have to build a set and stuff, but for this movie or for this particular scene, they didn't do that. And then it's like as the scene is unraveling, and it's like, no, oh, you betrayed me, and that's being revealed. She appears, Aubrey Plaza's character, as like a silhouette, and it's just like her leg or like her fingers like appearing on the screen like superimposed, and so and then the music kind of fit with this like serpentine, almost like this manipulative
Right.
character who played them, and so I think that was cool because that felt very Shakespearean. It felt very it had like it had at least like a character had taken an action against another character for like a good you know it's like, okay, this is good meaningful drama, or at least it would be if I knew
Why?
why or what we're going to
Yep.
do with it. But yeah. And that was like, aesthetically, it's like, this is great. This is so cool. Why did it take 10 years to do it? And how come it can't be slotted in with a movie that actually makes sense? Those are the two questions
R-
you're still,
right.
yeah.
Because thematically, it was very interesting what it what
Yeah.
you assumed it could be, I guess. But I mean,
Hmm.
the amount of like it felt like a madman had gone way too far down a conspiracy theorist rabbit hole, or multiple, I suppose,
Yeah.
and then made a movie about it. It's like, and he'd read way too much Homer and Marcus Aurelius, and then
Yeah.
way too much American politics, and just kind of crammed it all into a movie. And so it felt very referential in so many ways that in his head it all connects, but he doesn't communicate to an audience very well. You just kind of lost the whole movie. You're just, what is that referencing? What is that doing? How does that have anything to do with the
Yeah.
story? Because at some points it seems like he jumps back and he's like trying to make this statement that he believes. I don't know if he's telling to the audience or if he's just trying to make a statement in general, but it doesn't feel like it has enough to do with the story. And so the story just kind of fumbles around for a while until he kind of like comes back to his feet. But also, I mean, I couldn't figure it out the whole movie. I was like, because Adam Driver's character could stop time. There's no reason why no one else can do that. He doesn't do
Yeah.
anything valuable with it, and it doesn't have anything to do with his desire to create this utopia. There's this
Yeah.
substance.
It
It's
means
like a
nothing.
new
It's just a
element or
thing.
something that it's just there to create his utopia, but it also has nothing else to do with anything. It's just the material he uses, so it doesn't add to world building. None of it. It's all disconnected. Everything is disconnected, and it's just kind of like you slog through the whole movie. It felt so much longer than its actual runtime. When you leave, you're just like, I was exhausted. I was like, I was trying so hard just to understand anything that I couldn't. I was just tired.
It's just time. Yeah. Oh, yes.
So
So coming to terms with the making sense of this noise. And there, I had another point in there, and I think it kind of slipped my memory. But like, I think what's so frustrating about it is the threads when they disconnect, you get this really jarring sensation. So there's one example where you have this they talk about this satellite that's floating around the planet, and then at some point the satellite crashes onto the planet, and you don't see how big of a devastation, but it seemed like it was going to be a big deal. And then there is a shot of the city and this cloud or this dust wave that just blows in through the city, and so you get the impression that it fell into the ground, left a huge crater, and then the
Right.
fallout ensued. And then what it does is immediately after it it cuts to black, and then it has like just this small, like, if you could see it here, just this portion of the screen is visible, the rest is all black, and it's just Adam Driver's character in some kind of court trial. For some reason, I don't know why he was in court, but he's like talking, or he's just talking to the press, maybe. I couldn't tell, but either way he's being asked questions, and they're asking him about like this fallout. And it seems, and it happens around the midpoint, I think, in the movie. So part of you is like, oh, okay, so goodness, now things are going to start kicking into gear, and it's going to start making sense. But no, it cuts after that, and then it's never mentioned again whatsoever, which is why he end up with so many themes. Like the stuff about like the Nazis and Hitler stuff, like he uses like this shot of Hitler that's like very clearly old footage once, and that's the only clip of footage from
Right.
like past history that he uses the one time. And so you're like,
Well, and he has that scene
so what
with
does old have to do with anything, right?
well, he has that scene with Shia LaBeouf where he's like he's vying for office or something, and
Yeah,
they're like holding the American flags and stuff, and then he gets on this stump that's in the shape of the swastika, and you're like,
yeah,
what are we trying to convey here? And then they show the old footage, the actual real footage of Hitler, and then they just move
right.
on. I was like, well,
And then they just move on. It's never addressed. It's never brought up again. Not once. Like this is like just a snapshot in time, and then we're done with it. Or
yeah,
like the
it's
whole
over.
moon thing. That's like there's a shot of the moon and the clouds, and like this hand comes out and grabs the moon, and it reminds me of that old silent film where you have
Yeah,
the man in the moon, and then
right.
like the thing hits the eye or whatever the ship does, or whatever
Well,
it
they
is.
do the same
I
thing
haven't
with
seen it in a very long
and
time.
it's
Yeah,
intentionally told that it's Sputnik. It was Sputnik that fell out. It wasn't any other just random
it
satellite.
did
It's
say that,
Sputnik.
right?
It's
Okay.
Sputnik that fell. And they even show like the hammer and sickle and everything. This is Sputnik that's floating around and it's coming down. It falls down. So I mean, there must be some kind of symbolism about what he thinks politically. I guess I can't figure it out. But it falls down, and he does. So this also is visually interesting was when it comes down, the flames like cast shadows of people dying onto buildings and stuff. It felt very stage play esque
That's
as
right.
well.
Hmm.
Because they're just like, ah, and you just see the shadows of them dying or whatever. And so like visually, it was like, okay, this is interesting. This is kind of cool.
Yeah.
Then it has nothing to do with anything at all as you move on through the film.
Right.
So it's trying to deal with
Right.
some kind of political message, some kind of utopia slash dystopia that he's envisioning based on Greco-Roman culture, and then it's trying to deal with certain elements that he wants in there, like time control for some reason, um, which is weird because
Yeah.
the only times that he uses it, he like as a building's getting demolished, he like pauses it, and so you can see the demolition in slow motion or whatever. No, he like pauses, you can see it, and then he lets it go, and it has nothing to do with
Yeah,
anything. It
it's
doesn't
like
affect anything at
crumbling,
all.
and then yeah, he pauses, then he resumes, and it crumbles.
Right.
It was gonna do that
Doesn't,
anyways,
like, save
and
anybody.
then
He
we're
doesn't
done.
use it when Sputnik comes down, so he doesn't save anyone from that either. He could have, like, paused it, and they could have, like, cleaned it up, or I don't know. It doesn't make any
Yeah.
sense. None of it made sense.
Mhm.
Um, it was very extreme. It felt like it was designed by, like, a mad genius. That's what it felt like, trying to follow around someone who was connecting all this stuff in his head, and you
Yeah.
just couldn't follow it. But he
It
was
was
able
kind
to
of
put it into
like
a movie somehow.
it was kind of like this might be a little, far-fetched, but, like, it was almost like Kubrick came back and, like, possessed Coppola.
But Coppola
Just
didn't
because it
fully
was
let go, so they were just fighting about it the whole time, and it somehow
yeah,
got made
yeah.
into a movie.
Yeah, because like this feels like the brainchild of the two of them working on a project. Because Kubrick has really strange abstract movies
No, you know
too,
what it
but
felt like? It felt more
he
like Kubrick made one, Coppola made one, and then they just picked their favorite scenes from the two separate movies and they just crammed it all together.
Yeah.
That's what it felt like. Like
Yeah, just
they made
chopped it up,
totally
shoved it
separate movies.
together.
They made like a prompt and they both made a movie based off of it. And then they're like, well,
Yes.
this is what we got. So
Yeah.
let's just make one big movie out of it. So
Whew.
I was gonna try and standardize some kind of home front reviews
Okay.
section, and I was gonna like rate it.
Okay.
So the rating system that I've been trying to employ with you and I is the heart, mind, and soul.
Okay.
I can't even employ it here. How do you do this? How do you rate this movie? You can't rate this movie. It's so discombobulated. Like the one that I would equate it to is The Room, right? Because The Room does stuff like that. Like the mom comes in and she's like,
Okay.
"I have breast cancer," and the daughter's like, "Don't even worry about it. It's not a big deal." And then they never bring it up again. It's
Yeah.
it's like it's in there
Drop that
intentionally
thread.
to. It's yeah. It's like we're gonna just ignore it for the rest of the movie. And you're like, "Well, why did you put it in there first?" It's like, because I did, and then you just move on, and you're like, "Well,
Yeah.
thank you." That's what this whole movie felt like. It just kept
Yeah.
introducing ideas that it just didn't bring up again, just because he could.
Yeah.
And that's what the whole movie feels like.
Yeah, and that reminds me. So, like, my initial reaction is that when it ended, I thought to myself, I felt like I needed an entire lexicon of like multiple lifetimes just crammed into my head. Like I needed to not only have read every single Shakespeare play ever written, I
Right.
needed to have studied every single Shakespeare play ever written. And I need to have done the same thing to Marcus Aurelius, the same thing to Homer, the same thing to every philosopher, every important voice throughout human history. You need to be aware of all of them intimately, like down to like the minutia of like oh, you didn't pay attention one day on Nietzsche's when we were talking about Nietzsche. Oh, you're out. Nothing's gonna make sense to you now. Too bad. You should have paid attention. That's what it felt like. I was like, dude, who has? It made me feel like he just had so much information up here, and I'm like, who has this?
Right. Yeah, it was this entire encyclopedia of knowledge that you could just be like, that's a good point. Yeah, that was good. I like the way
Right.
you visually represented that. I think this is a great case of making sure that you are taking whatever message it is and having a message. I don't think this movie had a hypothesis, a clear thesis
I feel
that
like it did. And so I would disagree with you there. I feel like it clearly wants to say something, and it just gets totally lost in the shuffle.
okay, let's go with that theory. If that's the case, your job as a director, a storyteller, is to clearly communicate that, or at least clearly enough for me to get something. And this movie, I don't, it was like six or seven that I thought maybe, but every time that it would start to develop or I'd start to grasp something, it would turn to smoke and wisp away. And then a new thing would come
Right.
up and you try and grasp that one and it would happen again. And so the whole movie
Right.
was like that until the end. And you're just like, well, apparently these are all supposed to connect somehow, or I'm supposed to have followed all of these to an ending, to some kind of conclusion. Didn't
Right.
get it. I don't know. I have no idea what it was.
Well, because you don't even understand them in isolation.
No, I didn't.
Like Sputnik crashes onto the planet, there's this reaction scene, and then we're done. And you're like, wait, so what is that for? And some people were like, well, you're going to have to rewatch it for this stuff to make sense. I don't think so. I really don't think multiple viewings will help you.
No, I'm not watching it again.
he
Sorry,
has
Coppola.
these like he has these like plaques that start off like different chapters in the movie, and then the plaques are like these quotes, and they're just these like weird like distortions. Like there's one like it ends with like a distortion of the Star Spangled Banner basically.
Right.
um and you're like, it's like basically the same, but he like changed like two or three words, and so you're like, it's the same but not.
Also, you're asking
Okay,
why did you
sure.
distort it? What in the movie led me to believe that it would distort it in this way specifically?
Yeah.
Don't know. No clue.
And I even tried to appreciate it, like even if you were just thinking to yourself, oh, I just want to appreciate this from a visual perspective, because it is visually striking
Yeah.
in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
But then he'll do things that disrupt your enjoyment of that too. like the 90s rock band commercial, that's not a joke. That is in the movie
I forgot
where
about
it
that
just
until you
stops
said
and
it.
then someone
Yeah.
comes out and they're like, ah, like screaming like rock band style, and then like flames come up and they walk off screen, and you're like, that was a weird transition. What does that mean? What is that?
Don't worry about it. If you didn't get it, it's because you you failed as an audience member. I didn't fail as a director.
I also would like to say that I feel validated that after the movie, there were like 6 other people who saw it with us in the theater, and we like kind of
We asked
talked a
them.
little bit. It
Yeah.
was like, did that make sense to you? And they were like,
Yeah. Everyone just kind of had the same blank expression. They were like, I don't know what I just watched. All of them. So we all came to the same conclusion. Okay. So in closing, heart, mind, and soul. What do you think this movie had and why?
so you could argue it had mine because there were intellectual things like, referencing a philosopher or something.
Okay.
You would need some intellectual context to be able to put that into your movie. But I also feel like it's just pretentious with it because it doesn't
It just
like
expects you to
say
follow it
anything about
without
it.
it without it. He doesn't contextualize it in the way he understands
Yeah.
these things. He just thinks, oh well, if you've read any Marcus Aurelius, you would have the same conclusion that I just presented to you. And it's like, maybe, sure, but I want to know what it is you think about it and why it's important to this story. And he doesn't give that to you.
Yeah, yeah, I think you can argue either way. You can argue that end of like him not explaining is like partly his fault. It's like it doesn't matter how smart you are if you can't bring someone into that space, then your
Right.
point is totally worthless. That's one side of it. The other side of it is he cuts off the arc so quickly that you start to think to yourself, "Do you have a point? Because why did I have to go through that if you weren't going to do anything with it?" And I think that actually adds validity to your claim. We were like, you don't feel like the movie has a point. It that makes a lot of sense because some of
Or it
these
has too
threads
many points,
should
like
connect,
way too many points.
or too many. Yeah.
Like it floods
Well,
out
I mean,
anything.
I feel like it's our fault for assuming that getting a point from the movie is what we should be looking at. It
Stupid
almost felt
us.
like he thought that, like, Psh, you shouldn't be looking for meaning in my film, you fools.
I think. Oh, okay. So was that your? That's the only one you'd give it.
So that's my stance. So the intellectual one is the only one that I think you could
Okay.
reason with, the mind part. But the heart and soul, that stuff's just out the window. Because, like I said, there's no emotional connection. And there's like a romance that happens in it, but it just kind of
Yes,
happens. And you
yes.
never see why it's like, what does she see in him? What does he see in her? I don't understand.
Right.
What did they say that like really made them, that was different from what other characters had said or done?
Hmm. That romance story was seemed to have been told from a point of view that he was trying to represent it rather than show the romance itself. Like it was supposed to be more of an idea of romance that he was trying to visualize, but it didn't come across that way. You know, like for instance,
Yeah,
500 Days of Summer is trying to represent a feeling, right? It's trying to represent something that most people have
sure.
experienced in some way.
Yeah.
And it does it it's a little bit more down to earth, I suppose. Coppola is trying to do it in a very abstract way with this film,
Mhm.
but it was so abstract that you couldn't figure it out. So you pulled it back way too
Yeah.
far. I would actually argue here with you. Um, I think this movie has a lot of heart and none of the other two.
Okay.
So obviously it comes from a
Okay.
place of intelligence. Like I said, it feels like it comes from a brilliant madman. Like
Yeah.
he's been on the drugs for far too long, and he's perma fried at this point, and so he's just going to try and make a movie because that's what he knew, right? Coming up, that's
Mhm.
he went to school for it, and American Zoetrope is like his brainchild, and he was around all these very famous people. He's one of the most well known directors in the world, and so he's somewhere in there. He's like, "This is my my magnum opus, bro," and so he's just like he's been talking about it probably for years, and I'm sure enough
Yeah.
people have been like, "Don't do this, man. This doesn't make any sense." He's like, "Well,
Mhm.
Lucas didn't make any sense with Star Wars and he made it." Like that's what it feels like. And so he just like jumped in there and made it. So he's obviously
Yeah.
extremely passionate about making this thing that no one else understands. And it's coming from a place of knowledge that he has. Like, he has this vast store of knowledge that he's just using to put into this thing, but it doesn't come out in any kind of coherent way. So I would say that it has more heart than anything else, and the rest of it just falls flat because it feels very passionate. You can tell that this guy wanted to make this movie. I
Yeah,
think he has the writer, director, and producer credits on this film.
I think so.
So,
Well, yeah, and there's definitely parts where I could see that showing. There's this
right.
scene where Adam Driver and forget the actress's name, but they start to kind of fall in love. And like one of the nice scenes is where they get on this elevator and they're just riding the elevator up. And something about I don't even know if I could describe it. I don't know enough about old school filmmaking techniques, but the backdrop is really beautiful, but you could tell it's fake, and so it's this, and it feels very old Hollywood,
Intentionally
like
fake.
what
Yeah.
something they would, yeah, like put up some, okay, that's supposed to look like the city, even though it's not really there, just a picture.
Yeah. It's
But
like a
as they're riding up
projected
and like
background or
the,
whatever that they're sitting against. Yeah. Like old school
yeah,
driving in a
yeah,
car or
and
whatever.
so yeah, and it's a nice like sentimental thing that does come across. Like that told me more about their connection than any of the dialogue
Mhm.
did, which is really saying something because I felt like I kept asking myself throughout the movie. I'm like, I wish he would just make this like a visual treat and just be like, it's visual storytelling. Most of the dialogue is just to give you a little hint, and then that's it. But it's not. Like, there's sequences where there's a lot of dialogue going back and forth, and people are just spouting out noise that makes no sense. Um, and like at one point, when we got to the end, Adam Driver is making this speech, as he does a lot in this movie. And I was just like, what would it have felt like to have been Adam Driver in this film? Because I would have at some point been like, I feel like I'm just doing yet another speech. Isn't there does the audience know my character at all? Do they understand like what I'm all about? Because I feel like I'm doing this. I've already done like 15 of these scenes, and then Coppola was like, "We need
I
one more.
got you.
Just go."
Don't worry, it'll make sense in the end. It in fact did not make sense in the end.
Yeah.
I so there you have it, Megalopolis.
Do you recommend people go see it
No,
just for the visuals, or?
no, no,
I don't either. I
no,
don't think it's worth it at all.
it's not.
I think it's just going to confuse you and you'll be frustrated and disappointed.
I think you'll just be confused. I think that's the only thing you'll feel at the end of this movie. And like that's the thing, because I was relying on you at some point. I was like, I hope he's
Yeah.
getting something out of this because this is not my style. And it's abstract enough and it's got like an artistic
Yeah.
flair to it that it seems like it'd be more in your realm of interest. And when you
Oh,
looked at me and you're
definitely.
like, because I remember like I was just watching this thing and I could hear every once in a while. It wasn't very often. Every once in a while, you're just like, and then at one point you looked over at me and you're like, man, you couldn't make this any more impossible to follow. And I was like, okay, good. I'm not the only one. Thank God. So
I was trying. I really was. Then like an hour and a half in, I'm like, dude.
I give up. I give up. You're like trying to confuse me now. So that is the home front review of Megalopolis. Like I said, can't can't say I recommend it. I'm still trying to figure out what it is. I'm sorry I wasn't even that detailed about what was going on. I gave you the best I could with what I got. Those are the only two scenes that were coherent enough and relatable enough for me to talk about and understand on any kind of level, which is why they're
Yeah.
the only two ones that I mentioned at all.
Yeah.
Um, this
There's
is
there are two people I think that are vaguely interested in this movie. And one is people who like to make conspiracy theories out of the story and just like take these
right.
threads and just be like, the movie's about this thing based on this one little thing. And then like it happens one more other time here and here too. And you could see it like in the background slightly there, or like for a brief second here, piecing it together that way.
And
And
Francis Ford Coppola.
costume.
Oh, sorry. Yes.
No, I don't think if you like Francis Ford Coppola, you should
No,
see it, because I like Francis Ford
I'm saying
Coppola.
Francis Ford Coppola is the only
Oh.
other one interested in the movie. But yeah, go ahead.
Well, it's like you're trying to understand his mind. You're trying to figure out what it was he was thinking for each shot. You're not really trying to, because like the movie would have told you, it would have given you something to stand on. No.
Nope.
But the other crowd, I think, is
Costume
fashion
designers.
people
Yeah,
because there's some really cool costumes in this. It's
that's fair.
definitely going to be an Oscar nomination for best costume design. I'd be shocked if it didn't land it because
That's fair.
wow, some of the costumes were pretty cool.
Yeah.
Um,
It
yeah,
has a lot of very visually interesting moments, and yeah, they had a lot of opportunity to mess around with costume and set design. It just
they had a lot of opportunity to tell a story too, but they didn't take those up, unfortunately.
nope. I think we're gonna cut it there. This concludes the Homefront
I'm done.
review of Megalopolis. Thank you for watching.